A dark mirror. More like a late mirror. Hello everybody, it's the Warhipster here, coming at you with another Army Set Sprue review. Yes, today we are checking out the brand new Darkoath Army Set. Yes, Games Workshop have been very, very kind and have sent me the new Darkoath Army Set to build up and paint and review for all of you out there. And, well, before we get into all that, let me tell you a tale. In the course of filming this video, I learned a very valuable lesson. One, you should absolutely make sure that all of your filming equipment is working as intended. So you know how the format of these usually goes. We end up taking it a unit by unit, we look at the sprues, I talk about the sprues, I review the sprues, we see if they're any good, then I show you how long it takes to build them, and then we wrap up our thoughts at the end. And that is exactly what I thought I had filmed. Except none of the sound was working. So as far as you know, and as far as I know, I said lots of very cool, intelligible things at the time. But this time around, I have to do it again. So if for whatever reason the voiceover seems a little bit weird, well, more weird than it usually is, that's because I'm about to go and record it myself for the second time. Now, I remember everything about the sprues, but obviously things come naturally when you deliver things the way I normally do, and in the consequence of there being no sound means so making this video is going to be extremely stressful. So I can only apologize if the quality is less than what you expect. Now, as for the box set itself, enough about me. This one's funny because it feels like a box set out of time. It's peculiar in so many different ways, which you will see once we get into the meat and potatoes of the video. However, I've been equal parts super excited for the Darkoath and also kind of just like ambivalent is the correct word, I think. Slaves to Darkness got a huge range refresh not too long ago, and that was a very, very cool time, and maybe the Darkoath should have been closer to that. At least we'd have had a little bit more time with them before the inevitable Age of Sigmar 4.0. This box feels a little bit like a fireworks party in your back garden 2 nights before New Year's Eve. It's cool, but the real one is coming. It's tough to focus on anything other than AOS 4 right now, which is an extremely exciting time to be part of Age of Sigmar. And, well, the contents of this box are the dying embers of AOS 3. An edition that I have really loved and I've really enjoyed, but I am now ready. I have said my goodbyes, and, well, the Darkoath is the second to last stop in this wonderful edition that we've had so far. So in many ways it's a very exciting box. It's also a bit sad. It's also a little bit late. There's things about it that don't need to be in there and also are in there because they don't know any better, or at least that is the format of which we've had these boxes so far. Things like the book and the War Scroll cards. They're neat, they're great, they will help tie off what has been, for me, an incredible edition. However, they're only valid for a couple of months, and so, yeah. So bearing all of that in mind, we're going to take a look inside the Darkoath Army Set at what is a beautiful collection of models, but perhaps just slightly too late. Or early. Perhaps they've arrived precisely when they mean to. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. It really is a very helpful thing to do. It's fantastic and I really appreciate the support. And if you are excited for the Darkoath Army Set, or indeed Age of Sigmar 4, please do leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts. And just tell me what you're excited about. Just in general. Even if you just got something cool happening next weekend. So let's check it out then. Darkoath, the Army Set. So, kicking things off with the Slaves to Darkness Darkoath Army Set, and of course, here we have the front cover of the box, and, well, I like the artwork, but it looks a little bit AI generated. There's something wrong with the eyes on that individual. And of course, once we open the box, we get our insert. It's not a big art piece insert, it's the black Warhammer card. It's just to protect the plastic, I guess, in some way, shape or form. I missed the colour, I missed the large artwork versions, but you know, there it is, you can't have everything. And of course we then unveil a huge amount of plastic, lots and lots of plastic. Now at this point I got a little bit confused and lost because of the Darkoath Marauders, and we'll really get into the sprues later when we come to actually kind of sort of figuring this out, but it's not immediately clear because they are not duplicate sprues. So the sprues themselves just kind of, they're a little bit confusing in that it initially looks like that you've got like 6 of the same sprue basically, and you do, but it's connected in a very strange way in this box, in so that it looks like it could be sort of 2 completely different sets of sprues for loads of different marauders. Anyway, we'll get to it later. We then of course have the chieftain sprue, and we have the 3-stack sprue for the Wilderfiend, and then this is me getting confused, and we have the Fell Riders. They come across 3 sprues as well, so it's a pile of sprues, but the Wilderfiend is all connected across these 3 sort of A5, well not A5, quite small sprues, and then we have these ones, the 2 half sprues, well 3 half sprues, all stacked together to make the Fell Riders. There we go. All of the literature in the box, so the Battle Tome supplement, the instruction manual, and the cards and stuff, come in this envelope. We've also got a bit of paper just thrown in there, again to protect something, I guess. It's not doing a particularly good job, but inside this little envelope you get all of the stuff you need for playing and building all of the Darkoath stuff, and you get a cool little envelope, which is nice. Send some official documents in that. You do get the War Scroll cards in here, although, you know, what's kind of the point at this point in the edition. You also get the Battle Tome supplement as well, and as mentioned, you also get the instruction manual. There it is. There's the War Scroll cards. It's a shame because the mechanics for the Darkoath are pretty cool, and maybe some of it will return, so it's worth having a read for 4th edition, but I don't know exactly how much or whether these tokens are even going to be useful going forwards. They're actually quite loose, which is different for these kind of things that Games Workshop usually makes. Quite often they're very well put together. They don't all just kind of fall out from gravity, but these ones felt a little bit loose in the pack, which was a bit of a shame. It's just kind of trying to keep them intact was a little bit trickier. But you do get the 4 War Scroll cards and the tokens, which again, you'll probably find a use for them if you're going to continue to play 3rd edition games, or indeed they might work in 4th edition, we just don't know. Here we have the War Scroll supplement, Battle Tome supplement, lots of lovely pictures of course, loads of cool stuff in there, just lots of product photography, which is good as a reference point for your painting, and of course there's the War Scrolls as well, and the points, the pitch battle profiles. So everything you need to play the Darkoath in 3rd edition, but it's not been kind of pre-prepped forward for 4th, which we have seen occasionally in Age of Sigmar. Some of the later battle tomes in the edition have been kind of designed with the next edition in mind, which is why they don't necessarily make a lot of sense at the time, but this one is not pre-planned for because it's very different, clearly. We have a pile of bases here. We have a large round base. I think it's a 60mm. I can't remember. We'll find out in just a minute when I actually look in the instruction manual. We have some oval bases as well, and we have the bag of 28mm bases, as well as another larger, I think it's a 75mm oval base. As you can see, 2 different sizes. 1 for the character, 5 for the cavalry, which is really cool. Just get rid of that bit of paper now. Don't need it. And one of my bases had actually slipped underneath the card insert. So that's worth bearing in mind in case you think you're missing one. One of mine had actually slipped, which again, you don't normally see in these boxes, but this one had on this occasion. And of course, the large bag of 28mm. So we'll remove that box and move on. So now we have the instruction manual here. And as we can see, there we go. All of our sprues laid out before us. And this is where the kind of Marauders thing starts to make a little bit more sense to me in my mind, but not yet, because I didn't really fully understand the sprues just yet or what they were actually driving at. We get our little base diagram where we can test the size of our 75mm oval base for our character, 60mm oval bases for our cavalry, the 60mm round base and the 28mm round bases, all on that diagram. However, once again, the diagram is very, very useful, but for the shorter oval bases, so the 60mm oval bases, it doesn't actually fully line up, and I'm not sure why it does that. It's only really on oval bases where it doesn't quite match up. As you can see, there's a bit of an overlap for the base size. The 60mm round bases they always get right, but just the 60mm round oval bases, it's never printed correctly. It's always slightly different. It won't fully cover the 60mm oval base, but there's not another oval base in the box, so it has to be that one by the process of elimination. The 60mm oval base and the 28mm oval bases are pretty easy to understand, and because we've only got kind of two different sizes of the same shape base, it's fairly simple to kind of get your head around. The instruction manual does include a number of different options for things. It starts off with the Wilder Fiend and then moves on to the Chieftain, and after the Chieftain you then get the Marauders, and then finally the Fell Steed Riders, I think is their name. I can't remember now. Let me look it up. Darkoath Fell Riders. That's the one. The Darkoath Fell Riders are the last thing. So again, a slightly weirdly laid out instruction manual. It's just not usually what I would expect to see. Normally you would see the character go first, then the beastie, then the cavalry, and then the infantry as last place, but that's how they've laid it out in here. It's all part of this box where there are certain things that are slightly strange. We do have our key of what the sprues actually are here on the left as well, and this again you can see in a few minutes I'm about to start figuring out what the Darkoath Marauders sprue thing is doing. We do have the kind of the labeling of what they are, and the Marauders here, as you can see, it's 3 sets of sprues duplicated. It's not 6 individual sprues, despite how the sprues have actually been attached in the box. So as you'll see now, when I pull the sprues up in just a moment, you have a case of where, let's say, sprue A and sprue B are attached together for one half of the 20, but for the other half of the 20, sprue B and sprue C are actually attached together, which then means that you have A and C just floating there as 2 completely different sprues. So as I said, when I was looking at it, I thought, hang on, this is a 20 Marauders across 6 individual sprues. That's really cool, but it's not the case. It's 10 Marauders across 3 sprues, duplicated twice. And that was initially very, very confusing for me. Again, they don't normally do this. Normally it is printed straight out of the factory in these very kind of uniform ways. But this one, there is just something very different about it, and I cannot for the life of me understand as to why it's been packed that way. So the best thing to do, and I will do this later on in the video, is I will snap all of the sprues in half, as I usually like to do when it comes to reviewing these things, and then able to match the sprues up so that we end up having 10 and 10 rather than 10 overlapping with another 5 and this, that and the other. So it is just a slightly confusing and a strange thing to do within this box. For your new starters, I would just point this out as being a real kind of point of contention, although these boxes generally aren't meant for completely new starters. However, if you are diving in with the Darkoath Army Set into Age of Sigmar as you're getting ready for Age of Sigmar 4, it is worth pointing out that this is not how things are normally done. As you will know, as perhaps a historical 40k fan or something like that, traditionally, for example, the Kroot Carnivores box, it's 2 sets of the same sprue, and they're printed exactly the same way, but these ones, just for whatever reason, are printed completely differently, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why. This was about, as you can see, I've left it all in the video here for you because this is how long it spent kind of trying to figure this one out myself, and I really want to help you guys just kind of avoid that thing if you are planning on picking up this box yourself. So yeah, this was a point of confusion for me, and eventually I got there, as you can see, matching things up that way, but it wasn't easy. So kicking things off then, dodgy sprues aside, we are going to of course start with the Wilderfiend. As we always do with these things, we go in order. So we'll need these 3 sprues and the 60mm round base in order to build them, and as I usually like to do, I snap all the sprues just so that we have them in nice bite-sized manageable pieces. One, this is easier to build with because you're not wanging around this great big sprue, but also it's just easier to kind of like hunt for the pieces when you've got smaller sections to look for. So taking a quick look in the instruction manual, as we always like to do, we have a quick look to see if we have any optional extras or components or different alternate builds and things. And as you can see from page 1, you don't actually have any options, but on page 2, well, we go for 3 pages worth of instructions for the Wilderfiend. That's what I'm pointing out here first. This is very difficult to do this. I'm trying to remember all the smart things I said at the time. We have some optionals here with the head and the horns, but that's pretty much it. We do have an optional bit of jewelry that goes around the neck, A22 and A23, you can see it above there, but the mouths are basically a case of, do you want to have it open or closed? Do you want to have the top lip peeled back or not? You also have the different types of horns that you can apply, so one's slightly longer than the other one's a little bit more fiddly. There are just different versions of this that you can put together, which are pretty cool, although it is the only optional extra here. So like the posing of it, if you're going to have multiple of these, they are going to be posed pretty much the same. It's just that the mouth will be different and the bit of the kind of that hanging jewelry. As you can see, I was pointing out there in the key that, you know, you would generally see these different options here coloured with blue and green, but on the Wilderfiend we don't have that. It's just kind of not there. It's just like there is this optional piece, and you have that denoted by the yellow circle with the 3 shields in it, but you don't have the green or blue thing happening on page 1, which is a little bit strange to me, but it is what it is. So having a look at the sprues first of all then. So we start with this one, and this is going to be a theme throughout all of these sprues. They are not particularly well attached to the sprues. There are areas where you have to praise them, and there are a lot of criticisms to be had as well. So things like the rocks, as you can see here, it's a very complex scenic base that the Wilderfiend is standing on. There's lots and lots of different piles. It's very reminiscent of kind of creating your own scenic bases out of cork, for example, which is cool, and it should be reasonably familiar, and it goes together really well, but it is kind of these sections of rock, and they're all attached as rocks would expect. However, what we do have is we have, for example, and this is where things just start getting a little bit infuriating with the box set, we have the connection points on the sprue to the actual smooth horns, but also on smooth flesh at the same time. So this particular piece that I'm worrying over on the left here, you could have connected it to the kind of smooth inner joins, but instead it's on all the outward facing smooth details or against seams and things where other bits of muscle are going to connect into it. So you will have to just be really careful when assembling these pieces. I'm pointing out here that when you're clipping off things like these horns, again, they're connected to the sprue right at the tip of the horn. So the reason this can be a little bit of an issue is if you're not 100% careful, or you're not 100% concentrating for whatever reason, you can end up accidentally, as I'm demonstrating here with the angle, just end up clipping off the end of the horn. So you do want to be really careful around here. You just want to make sure you get in there and clip it around like that. Just make sure you're paying attention, because it is one of those ones where it's very easy to accidentally just take the tip of the horn off. And again, it's connected there, and it doesn't have to be. The tail as well, we have connection points all the way along the smooth outward areas of the tail, so it does mean that kind of clipping these details out and smoothing them down is going to be taking a little bit longer than it absolutely has to. We have a bit of kind of like the kind of not natural areas. So we have some cloth and the belt here where the connection points are around the outside of it, which is pretty good. That's a highlight here on this sprue. But then we also have fiddly horns, again connected on the actual smooth parts of the horns / tusks, whatever they're called. The other thing as well to point out on these sprues is that the hands are all connected right on the knuckle point of the hand as well, hands and the feet. So again, it's just another kind of area where it becomes slightly trickier to kind of smooth down and get off the sprue. So you have to be really careful. You have to just kind of move with the curvature of these pieces in order to get the nicest and smoothest kind of components off of your sprue. These pieces don't generally tend to cross the 3D plane. Some of them do, which means you might have to watch out for the occasional slightly strange mold line. But one thing I will say in the defense of many of these kits and sprues is that there aren't actually that many big chunky mold lines, which is fantastic, and it is what I come to expect from these newer, more modern kits from Games Workshop. But this one, there weren't that many mold lines on the Wilderfiend, and that will go for most of the box. However, it is not the entire box. We then have another sprue here where it's much the same pieces of feedback as I've just given on the previous sprue. Again, you have rocks and stuff where the connection points are all around the outside, which is fine, and that's okay. You can deal with that. But then you have areas on here like the arms and the legs of it where you have connection points like right on the front of the knee, and the knees are all kind of pointing forwards in the model, if that makes sense. They are right there front and center, and they are seamed as well. You have the kind of the inside of the thigh connects into the outside of the leg, and so when you have that connection point right there on the front of the knee, it can be slightly annoying. It can just be quite frustrating. We also have, again, some fiddly clip points, for example, on these trophies and things that hang from the belt of the Wilderfiend and stuff like that. Again, you just have to be really careful when you're clipping these out and moving with the curvature of these pieces. This is a thing that you're going to have with a large organic beastie like this. It's not all covered in armor and stuff, but you do just kind of have to kind of look at it and say, well, I think some of these pieces could have absolutely been laid out a little bit better. For example, that foot just there, having that connection point right there on the knuckle next to the claw can just be really, really, really annoying to clip it out and get it nice and smooth. And it's one of those little tiny pieces, because it's on the third finger, for example. It can be one of those bits that you just miss and forget that it's there, and then when you've come to prime it, there's this nice little bit of extra flash there. Again, connection points on smooth muscles. We've already talked about it on this sprue, but on smooth muscles, and of course right next to joins in muscles. Not any of these hands or arms are fully intact on the Wilderfiend, which I've said my piece about before, in that there are some times where it's just attach the hand. That would be really nice, but it is what it is. The head as well. Both the heads, as we've seen in the instruction manual, they come in two halves, which means you do run the risk of a join line going right down the middle of the forehead. Again, you don't like to see it, but it's here. So that is another major point of criticism about this beastie. It's because of the long snout, and I get that, but sometimes Games Workshop has proven that it's very capable of doing, for example, horse heads almost fully intact, and then maybe you just glue on some armor on the top of the horse or something like that. It would have been nice to have seen something like that with here on the Wilderfiend, instead of the kind of join line across the top of the head, and then also on the bottom as well. The underside of the head is a separate component entirely, like the tongue and stuff. It's just the top of the head is in two halves, and then the underside is one half. And, you know, it would have been nice to have two halves together rather than so many components to make the head. On our final sprue, we have some bonus extra hairs because summer is coming, which means I'm molting my winter coat at the moment. So, again, another theme as I was building this. We have our optional jewelry here. We have one with a hanging rock and the other one with some hanging bones and stuff. I ended up going for the hanging rock because I thought it looked cooler. We then, of course, have another hand here where the connection point is right on the knuckle of the finger. So again, another kind of slightly more complex area. And again, we have another tiny little foot here, which will go on one of the legs. And The reason these kind of be a little bit annoying is, one, also because of that extra flash being left behind, but also because it's a tiny little piece, it can be a little bit difficult to find on the sprue, and it's just one of those things. So just be careful with it. Again, we have the other side of the body with the connection points once again on the top of the tusk or horn or spike, and again in the soft muscles and stuff like that, not in the joins or anything like that where it's easily hidden or put together. It's just it's exactly the same as the other half. And you know, again, large horns and stuff over here on the left hand side with the connection points on the smooth horns, connection points on the outward facing knee and soft muscles and stuff. It's just one of those things. It's a slightly more complex kit, and it is going to take some extra time to get this one together. So we jump on the time lapse now, and I'll tell you exactly how long it takes to build the Wilderfiend, and then we'll be right back with more sprues. So our Wilderfiend is all built, and it took 1 hour and 5 minutes and 3 seconds. This is the beauty of doing the voiceover instead of doing it in the actual room. But for a model that took 1 hour and 5 minutes and 3 seconds to build, it's not as big as I perhaps initially thought. It's big, especially when you compare it to like the Marauders and stuff, but it's surprising that it took that long. But then at the same time, because of all of those connection points on the sprues, it's also not that surprising. So moving on now to the Darkoath Chieftain on Warsteed. As you can see, this is where you're going to get that more familiar thing from Games Workshop instruction manuals, and then you have the color coding for the optionals and things like that. So you can give him the sword or the axe, and this is actually pretty much the first thing you choose, which is strange about this kit, is that you build the entire rider. Now we do have optional heads as well, 3 of them, which is cool. One with a helmet, one with a half helmet, and one with no helmet whatsoever. And as I'm kind of pointing out here, you build the entirety of the rider, and then you build the entirety of the steed. And then you push them all together, and then you finally have the construction of the base, and that builds you the Darkoath Chieftain. And you don't really see this anymore. This is quite a retro way of doing these things quite often. Like the legs and stuff are built into the kind of like the saddle and stuff. And you know, I can't remember why I'm showing this off. I think it's because of the similarity in the bases, like the stacked cork and stuff. Well, and kind of that vibe. Again, this one has also got the stacked cork vibe for the base. Anyway, the first choice you make is the axe and the sword, and then of course you have the optional extras for the head. You have another option for the horse's helmet as well, so it can either have sort of a normal face or like a bladed armored thing on its head. And there you go, it's over the cross of all 3 pages. Now, the thing that is quite interesting about building this, as I mentioned, is you build the entirety of the rider and then you build the entirety of the steed, which does as a kind of sub-assembly thing. For those of you who like to build in sub-assemblies, that's really good. It's better than, for example, some of them where like the legs are actually attached to the saddle and stuff. They're all sculpted in. But for me, it's like I'm not going to sub-assemble anyway, so it is what it is. Again, more molting for the summer. Lots and lots of extra hairs. For some reason, I'm losing my hair. Maybe I'm going bald. Maybe I shall become bald hipster. We snap the sprues in half because we only require the 2, and it is easier, as always, to actually cover these in halves and halves. So on this sprue, the very first thing that leaps out at me, as soon as I pick it up, and this is what I was saying here at this point, I remember this well, the very first thing that leaps out at me is right there in the top left corner, despite all those hairs I'm having to remove. Top left corner, right there, is the sword. My finger's on it right there. Connection point on the actual blade, the cutting edge of the blade. And as you know, this for me is always an immediate no-no. I hate it. I really don't like it. It's not good. It makes things more difficult than it needs to be, and you can end up kind of accidentally taking out chunks of your swords, which you don't ever want to do because it's not a natural chunk, it's just a smoothing down of the flat of the cutting edge of the blade. The axe escapes this, and again, this is going to be a theme for the whole box, but that sword is a big no-no. For that very reason is why I choose the axe. Is the only reason why I choose the axe. I think they're both cool, but the connection point on the actual blade is a big no-no. Now we have some of the heads and stuff here where the connection points are actually on the top of the head and in the hair. Once again, you kind of have to expect this when the hair and the head is attached, especially when it's a long flowing hair like this, but I don't ever like to see it. As you know, I like my heads to be attached at the neck, which means I don't have to mess about with clipping on the tops of foreheads and stuff. I do end up going with the helmeted option, which is that one which I'm looking at just there, because if I do happen to flatten off or chop something or kind of accidentally take too much off the helmet, then it's not so much a big issue because it's a helmet, right? Whereas a smooth head, it's a slightly different deal. The kind of hanging spear just there, as you can see, I pointed it out, connection point on the blade. And then we have the horse bodies, and the horse bodies are interesting in this one because we have the connection points on the muscles of the horse, on the front of the horse, and you kind of come to expect that. And also there will almost invariably always be one on the kind of the rump of the horse. But then we do actually have the connection points on the underside of the hooves, which is great. That's fantastic. We like to see that. That is a plus sign. We also have a leg, one of the rider's legs here, and the connection point is on the underside of the boot and in the join of the waist. So that's great. That'll go together nicely. We don't have a connection point on a knee, for example. But then we're let down immediately by this trophy rack where you have the connection points on each of the heads, on the sides of the heads. We also have the kind of torso of the chieftain where the connection point is right there on the smooth shoulder. So again, it's not all plus sides, but it's not also all good things. We do have the slightly spindly reins here on the rider's hand just over there. So I'm just demonstrating there that you should clip the top one on the actual rein first and then do the joint so that you don't end up putting any pressure on it and so you don't snap the component as you're bringing it off. We have some fur as well where the connection points are generally okay. However, we do have ones that overlap on the actual outward facing areas rather than just being around the outside, which is a bit of a downer. Overall, it's kind of a mixed bag, this sprue. So next up we have this one where we have the vast majority of our rocks and things. So these are quite big chunky rocks as opposed to the Wilder Fiend who had lots and lots of tiny rocks all stacked up. We do have the kind of mane of the horse where the connection points are on around the outside and in pretty easy to get off places rather than towards the tips of the hair, which is good. Like to see that. Just again, make sure you're being careful and not taking too much off with your mold line remover or your knife. We do have the horse's head, which is again attached quite nicely. We have it in the joint and also on the flat kind of point of the head where you're going to stick on a piece of armor. Again, just molting constantly. Summer is approaching, guys. You know, got to get rid of your winter coats. I've said that several times throughout this, but it is just a theme as I was building this. I don't know why. Anyway, more components, similarly different kind of criticisms and then also praise at the same time. For example, on the saddle you have the connection points where you're never going to see them, where you're going to actually glue the rider over the top, but then you have it in and amongst like the horsehair of the blanket and stuff. So it is just one of those things. Another trophy rack where the connection points are on outside of all of the heads. So again, just watch out for those. Make sure you move with the curvature of those pieces because otherwise you will smooth them off. And you know, they're smooth heads despite how much they've been bunged up by being chaosed. I also had a really itchy wrist at this point. I have no idea why. We have the other leg, which is again similarly connected to the other leg. It's on the underside of the boot and in the joint of the waist, which is just good. We have the kind of the bits of the kind of the horse head armor and stuff, which are not too kind of difficult pieces to put together, which is okay. Overall, it's a sprue of kind of two halves. There's stuff to really praise about it, and there's also stuff to really criticize about it. And I feel like, you know, some of this could have just been laid out a little bit better. The swords in particular, having those cutting edges being attached to the sprue is just always a big no-no for me. But the bodies of the horse are generally just about okay. They're borderline acceptable and stuff like that. As you can see, this is what I'm covering now. So it's time to look at how long it takes to build. With the chieftain all built, as you can see, there he is. He's pretty cool. He's quite big. As you can see, he's about the same height as the Wilderfiend, which is surprising. Or I guess not really surprising. There's a man whirling an axe in the air, of course. So next up on our trip through the Darkoath Army Set is the Darkoath Marauders, even with all their super confusing sprues in the box. So as you can see here, what you get is you get a bunch of interchangeable parts in the form of the shields. All of the shields are swappable between all of the miniatures. So it does actually state in here as well, interestingly enough, and this might be planning forwards for AOS 4, all models in the unit must be armed with the same weapon option. So you have the swords, which can also be axes. It is what it is. Or you have the spears. You must go with one or the other. They don't just have like Darkoath savage weapons. It's swords and swords or axes, or spears and shields. You have the shields with the swords and axes as well, of course. All of the shields, as mentioned, are completely interchangeable. None of them are key locked to any particular miniature, which is nice. So you can have a bunch of different ones, and there's obviously spares as well. So you don't have to use all of the shields. You know, if there's ones you don't particularly like, you don't want to use, you can throw them in. Now, the way you build them is you have the option for the champion here in the blue or the pink track in terms of the axe or the spear. There is not a sword option on the champion, although you could use a sword. You have the Darkoath Marauder as well there in the green or yellow track as well, using the same thing. So if you want to build a big unit of 20, you can, or you want to build 2 units of 10, you absolutely can as well. Then what you also have on the next page, well, as you can see, I'm pointing out here that it's color coded within the actual building of the miniature. However, you don't have the pink track, you just have the pink option there for the spear, and then you have the green track as well. Then we have the options for either a standard bearer or a marauder, and we have the rest of the options for the marauders all being the spears or swords / axes. Whichever one you choose is the one that you want to put on, that is consistent across the entire unit. There is also a musician in here in the form of a drummer. The drummer has a cool slung sword but doesn't have a slung spear as an option, which is interesting. Doesn't really make sense, but it's AOS, right? So they're all spears if they're all spears, is generally the the way these things work with Age of Sigmar units and the building of loadouts and such. To build our marauders then, we will require this bag of 20 28mm round bases, of course. There's no other bases in there, so they're all 28mm bases. And then we will require 6 sprues. Now I've snapped them all so that we have 2 stacks of 3, or at least we will. As you can see, what I've done here is I've actually lined them up as the 2, the 2, and the 2. And it was at this point that I proved to myself that they were in fact all identical sprues. It's just that they were connected in a slightly strange way in this box. Again, I've gone over that several times so far in the video, but it is worth pointing out that it is slightly strange. So we can then, if we snap them all into 2 lots of sprues, we can then just remove 1 of each of the sets, and then we got our set of sprues to build 10 Darkoath Marauders. That way we don't get confused or end up kind of cross building between the two, so you end up using the same component twice by accident or anything like that. So firstly, looking at this sprue, and the first thing that will be pointed out right here, as you can see, is all of those cutting edges, except for the axes. The swords and the spears, though, have got connection points on the blades. So yeah, once again, that is a big no-no. No, 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 no. We don't like it. The axes are absolutely fine. All of the axes in this box escape completely unscathed. You have a connection point on the top, on the kind of the non-cutting part of the axe, and it's absolutely fine. Whereas the swords, spears, they all seem to have a cutting edge literally right on them, which is just a bit of a shame. The arms and stuff, they generally tend to have a connection point around some of the armor, and generally are connected on the leather, which is better than the kind of like the bicep or the elbow or something. It's still not ideal, but it is the better place for those things. We have more of the heads and things on here where at times they get connected at the neck, which is great, but then they also have a connection point right in the middle of all of the hair. So it's one of those things where you have to just be really careful, and you have to clip it quite close, and then make sure you're not kind of smoothing out too much with your knife or mold line remover, removing an actual entire strand of hair, because that's one thing you don't want to do. The bodies as well are quite interesting in that there is a real mixed bag of how they're attached to the sprues. You sometimes have it where you have a connection point like right on a shoulder, or kind of like in amongst the kind of I guess you would call it the abs or the sides, their flanks as it were. But then you also have things where it's connected like just on the cloth and on the underside of a boot. So it's a mixed bag when it comes to the sections of the bodies. It's half great and half really annoying. The shields generally, as a rule, have a connection point around the outside. It never encroaches over the front of the shield, or indeed encroaches too much over the back. They're nice and easy to deal with. However, it is a rounded shield edge, so just be a little bit careful that you're not too kind of overzealous with your knife, because otherwise you will smooth those things out. Moving on to the next sprue. You have pretty much the same kinds of feedback here going on. The axes again escape unscathed. Then we have the spears, where it's all connected on the cutting edge of the spear, and indeed some of these are actually connected not just on the cutting edge of the spear, but in amongst the leather wrap on the handle, which is equally annoying, rather than it being kind of on the sort of counterweight at the back, the sort of the heavy counterbalancing thing. I'm not entirely sure what the word is for it on a spear. Somebody correct me in the comments, I'm sure. Shields again are absolutely fine, but as mentioned, those spears are just connected in a really irritating way, which actually governed how I built this unit. I built it with as many axes as I possibly could, and unfortunately I did then also have to use some of the swords as well, because I wanted to mix and match, and it was just as annoying as I perhaps once feared. The second unit, once I get around to building them, I will actually do them with the spears, so maybe maybe it'll be fine, but in actual fact at this point I was too kind of worried about how much longer it was going to take to build with the spears, so I ended up not going with the spears. As it happens, as I said, the axes are absolutely fine. The heads, again, we have similar feedback going on here in that it's occasionally attached at the neck, and that's okay, but then it's right in amongst the hair, or if it's kind of, there isn't too much hair, you then have a connection point on the neck, which is really great. So like I said, some of the heads are fantastic, some of them are really irritating. Again, on our third and final sprue, our swords and our spears and things are connected on the cutting blades once again. It's almost like none of these spears or swords actually escape unscathed like that. And our bodies, again, are a real mixed bag of occasionally it's connected on the underside of the boot, and that's all well and good, but then every so often here, where you end up having kind of more of the bodies that don't actually wear trousers, for example, you have a connection point like right on a leg muscle, which is quite a frustrating place for those connection points to be placed, because you want it to be a nice smooth muscle. You don't want it to be flattened off with a knife or anything. So this is another kit in here where there are actually 20 of these models, where you have to be really careful as you're building them, and that is just kind of going to make things a little bit more difficult and is going to take a lot longer to build these. And, well, there you go. So we're going to jump in and we're going to start building them in just a minute. We're going to see how long it takes to build one of these sprues. Not one of these sprues, one of these miniatures. And we'll be right back once that's done. Let's see how long it takes. So, at nearly 15 minutes each for our Marauders, it takes about an hour to build just 4, and there's 20 of them. So, by that logic, it'll take you 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 5 hours to build 20 models, which is an incredibly long time to build what is essentially a rank and file troop. Because of the placement of all those sprue connectors. It's a bit of a shame. But we must move on, of course, to the last unit in the box, which is the Fell Riders. Here they are. So, as you can see, there are a whole heap of interchangeable parts. You have the kind of the D72 to D76 is the kind of front of the horse's armor. It's the bit that hangs between their front legs. And then we have D77 to D81, which is the bit that goes on the horse's nose. It is effectively the horse's nose that goes in there. And those are all interchangeable. It doesn't matter which ones you put them on. Again, none of them are keyed specifically to a horse, so you can swap them in and out. The horses aren't particularly different when it comes to how they're laid out. So there's not going to be too much variation, but it is enough to add a little bit of a slight different variant to each of your units of Fell Riders, should you wish to have multiple. The shields are, of course, all interchangeable as well, and then there are a pile of different heads as well, 19 and 20. Some of them are kind of female heads, some of them are male heads, and that's kind of the interchangeable options. That's how that kind of works. And as you can see, we have a war scroll here for the Darkoath Fell Riders. The difference between the javelins and broadswords, and this is where I kind of had a little bit of a chuckle to myself, because a lot of the time there isn't actually a sword option. There's a sword there, as you can see on the actual war scroll, but quite a lot of the time, instead of a broadsword, it's in fact an axe. So an axe is a broadsword, according to the Darkoath Fell Riders. As you can see, this is a great example of what the War Scroll actually look like for these Darkoath stuff. They have the cool things like the Oath of the Raider and how these sort of things work. It's a nice little mechanic that they have. They have an oath that they wish to fulfill on the tabletop. It's very similar in some ways to the Space Walls, which for 40k fans will kind of know how that works, except this is across pretty much everything. It's not just kind of limited to your characters, which is pretty cool. Now, the Darkoath Fell Riders, they choose either the Marauder Javelin or the Broadsword. And again, maybe this is some overshadowing for AOS 4. The Marauder Javelin lets them have a ranged attack. They don't have that Marauder Javelin ranged attack if they take the Broadsword. So it's one or the other. Again, that might be overshadowing for AOS 4. I just don't know. But it could just be a product of AOS 3. It might be that in AOS 4 they just have javelins and broadswords and it doesn't really matter, but we shall find out in due course, of course. The difference here in AOS 3 is, of course, that if you take the broadsword, you've got 3 attacks. If you take the Marauder Javelin, you've got 2 attacks plus a ranged attack, so 3 attacks. Ultimately, it all evens out, except that the missile weapon has D3 damage instead of 1 damage, so it potentially does a little bit more damage, but that doesn't really matter at this point. So, back to the instruction manual. As you can see, over here you have your options on your champion, first and foremost, where you will build up the kind of the horse and the kind of saddle, and then you'll choose whether you're going to build a champion or a Darkoath Fell Rider. This is where there is an option for a sword, but for the champion, if you want the broadsword on the champion, it's actually an axe. Which doesn't make a whole heap of sense. Again, I just kept finding this really, really funny as I was building this. So you build up, as I mentioned, the body, and then you build the variant that you want on top via the kind of from the torso upwards in terms of the person that's going to be riding it, whether it's the champion or just your bang average fell rider. But your broadsword is definitely an axe, and an axe is definitely a broadsword. You then have the next option, which is of course either a Darkoath fell rider or a standard bearer. And as you can see, the standard bearer, oh, we flipped over back to the previous page, the standard bearer has the choice right down at the bottom there of a broadsword, which is in fact an axe, or or a javelin, or the standard itself. Again, it just kept getting funnier and funnier as we went through the instruction manual, which was very, very amusing to me. In that, yeah, just very, very funny. There is also an option here for a musician who again can take an axe, which is a broadsword. The musician actually has a slung sword if you have the horn, but if you just want to build a fell rider with a broadsword, you will be building it with an axe. So far we've had 3 axes and no swords. Well, 1 sword possibly, also a slung sword in a scabbard, which is a really cool detail. I like that. I'm always a big fan of that, as you know. Then of course there's 2 remaining fell riders, and this is where you can actually get some broadswords in there. So over here on the right hand side you can see the broadsword there, or the javelin, and then there is the final one, which is actually on the back page, which is interesting because quite often in the army sets, the instruction manuals, the back page is the domain of lots of product photography, but as you can see there, broadsword. So the ones that carry specialized equipment have axes, which are broadswords, or you have the ones that have broadswords. It's just very, very funny. I don't understand why, but maybe there should have been an option for an axe instead. Who can say? So, in order to build our fell riders, we will require the last remaining sprues, which are, well, firstly, we have our 60mm oval bases, 5 of them, and then we have our 3 sprues with which to build the fell riders. So for our 3 sprues of fell riders, this is where the set actually slightly redeems itself in some places. It's actually quite a good set of sprues, which makes a nice difference to the other ones. Now, as you can see, I'm pointing out here that once again, the spears and the swords are actually connected at the cutting blade. So that is just a theme for the Darkoath, which is a shame. It is a real shame. It's not the exception, it is the norm for these miniatures. However, what you will see as you're going through these sprues is that, one, the shields are very consistent with the Marauders. They're all connected around the outside, and they've actually, in some places, got less connection points than the Marauders. There's only 2, which is great. It means they come out a lot easier, and there's less to smooth down. You then also have the horse bodies, where they're occasionally connected a little bit overzealously. For example, this one that I've got my thumb on the top left corner, we have a connection point there on the underside of the hoof, but then we have it on the rump of the horse, we have it in the connection of the neck, which is okay. We then have it on the underside of the kind of piece of terrain, which is okay, but then you have one like slap bang right on the middle of the back, on the hind leg's knee, which is a bit of a shame. The heads as well, generally most of the heads, at least on this sprue for sure, are connected at the neck, which is really good. The other side of that horse body, as you can see, it's connected in the horse's tail and on the underside of the hooves and in the saddle, where it's never going to be seen. So that's really good. You do pretty much always on a horse body have a connection point on the front of the horse in the muscles. That is kind of fairly familiar. It's just a thing. And then you of course have the torso of the rider as well. This one in particular is very interesting because it's connected only ever at joins. So the join of the neck, the underside of the waist, or where you're going to glue on the rest of the arm with the weapon in over the top of the bracer. So that's really, really good. Like, that's a really nice way to attach these things to the sprues. You then, of course, differently to the chieftains, these are not built with riders separate and then the riders are attached to the horse afterwards. The kind of waist, or the kind of, you know, from the knee up to the the trouser line, the stomach line, that is all kind of sculpted onto the horse. You then glue in like the knee downwards as part of the saddle blanket, and then you build in the rest of the torso, the arms, and that as consistent, and that is across all 5 of them. So there's no separate riders here. So doing these in sub-assemblies is a little bit more difficult than it would be the Darkoath Chieftain. But again, you can leave things like the shields off if that's something that you want to do, because they work exactly the same. You could even use some of the shields from the Marauders on these, because it is exactly the same. The connection point is exactly the same. So if you wanted to take one of these shields to make one of your guys a little bit more fancy, if you wanted to do that, you could. But again, also if you wanted to take one of the ones from the Marauders to make your Fel Riders a little bit more fancy, you absolutely can do that. The feedback is very, very similar on this sprue. But on this sprue, as you can see, we have far more of the kind of gubbins. So this is where we have some of our interchangeable parts, like that front horse armor down there, all 5 of those. Because it's a piece of armor, the connection points being all the way around the outside is exactly what I'd like to see, and that is what we do see. We have that slung sword for the musician, which is nicely connected to the sprue. Again, just one little connection point right there in the leather of the sheath. The axe, again, escapes completely unscathed, no connection point on the cutting edge of the axe. But then we have the javelin, which does have a connection point right on the cutting edge of the blade. The heads, again, as you'll see here, we've got some really complicated hairdos and stuff like that, and some of those have got a connection point on the underside of the hair, but at no point does it on this sprue the connection point end up on the top of the hairdo where you would absolutely see it. So you can be a little bit rougher with it, you don't have to be so careful. The underside of the necks as well is where it's mostly connected. At no point is there a head that is connected, like for example on the temple or on the top of the head. That's, you know, just fantastic. The only thing to watch out for on this sprue in particular, and I'm not sure if I filmed it, but is that when you have the heads sat in that kind of 2D way, going sort of left to right in profile, I think is the correct term for that, you do have to watch out for a mold line going all the way up the middle of the face, and that's always a downside. We never like to see that. So actually there are enough heads in here for it to be that there might be a mold line above the ear, but otherwise you do want to watch out for some of those more flowing hairdos on that sprue, because there is a case of there might be a couple of mold lines going right up the nose. And this sprue, I believe, is the one that had the worst, thickest mold lines, and that is a mark down for the Fel Riders. They have a lot that they are making up for the rest of the box, especially for things like the bodies and stuff, but they also do have the thickest mold lines, which is, you know, none of these kits within the army set actually escape unscathed with quite critical not failures, but I guess failures is the word I'm going to use within the sprues. Again, cutting edges of swords and spears and stuff, they've all got connection points there and there. But the bodies of the horses, again, they're pretty sparing with the connection points, and when they do have them, they are in pretty easy to cover up ways, like the underside of hoofs, or like right on the kind of the girth, I think is what it's called, the strap that goes underneath a horse to hold the saddle in place, or it's connected like right in the saddle where you'll never see it, and this, that, and the other. The reins and stuff, there's a lot more of those on here, as you can see. They are connected pretty well, however, do just make sure you clip it on the rein, the outstretched rein, rather than the arm first, so you don't put any stress on the actual rein itself or snap anything off. It's not really much of a worry on these because they are kind of quite sturdy pieces, but it is just worth bearing in mind. And once again, you have more like the kind of the Marauders bodies themselves, the ones that actually, the Fel Riders, they're just really nicely attached to the sprue, connection points in the neck and at the waist. So yeah, again, it's kind of a redeeming factor right at the end of the box, but it's also got some things that are just things to be critical of. So ultimately, it is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it. But we shall now see how long it takes to build one of the Fel Riders, and then we'll be right back. there you have it. The Darkoath Army set all built in all of its glory. I didn't build the other 10 Marauders just yet. I will do. I'll get to them. I've got to get some spears built. Who knows what they're going to do in AOS 4? Because I certainly don't. Now, the question on everybody's lips, as always at this point, is did Josh paint any or all of the set? Well, I did manage to get 10 of the Marauders fully painted, and, as it will slowly lumber into view now, the Wilder Fiend. It's an absolutely gorgeous model, and as you can see, like when it's contextually next to things like the Darkoath Marauders, it does look really, really big, and it's an absolutely fantastic piece. Really cool set of little models, and well, just the Fell Riders and the Chieftain left to go. Left all the cavalry till last, as per usual. So yeah, we're halfway through the production of the painting of the set. 2 more videos left to go, the Chieftain and the Fell Riders. I'm excited to get on with them. Somber horses. So hot right now. Okay, so let's start with the really easy part. The models. Are the models cool? Absolutely they are. Do they look fantastic? Absolutely they do. As far as I'm concerned, Games Workshop very, very, very rarely puts a foot wrong when it comes to Age of Sigmar. There's 1 or 2, maybe, in the last 3 years where I think it could have been a little bit more interesting, but otherwise, Age of Sigmar models, 99% success rate in terms of the releases so far. That's just my opinion. Some of you may disagree, of course. So, in that respect, the models are excellent. No notes. However, we can't grade the box just on the models, because that wouldn't be correct or fair to do, or indeed an unbiased view. The actual sprues in here are not great. The Marauders being as confusing as they were in terms of the way that they were put into the box or printed out or cut from the sprue, or however you want to talk about it, the way that they were in the box was actively frustrating for me. And a lot of the placement of the cutting points from the sprue also were actively frustrating. So many of those cutting blades being attached at the cutting part of the sword, I cannot for the life of me understand why they keep doing that. Especially when they prove so often that they don't have to do it. It's just really frustrating. A lot of the most characterful heads in there as well had really annoying placement, and a lot of the muscles and joins and things where there are opportunities to put sprue connectors, they just didn't use them. Instead, they kind of opted for the worst parts of the models to put the connectors to the sprue, and that is a problem. It makes what should be a set of miniatures that is not necessarily the focus of your Slaves to Darkness army, but indeed kind of the bulk of it, maybe, depending on how you want to build them or something like that. It makes them feel way more technically difficult than they actually need to be. If you kind of look at some of the more retro aspects of this kit, especially when it comes to things like the Chieftain with the rider being totally separate to the horse, you have things like that which are really kind of cool from the hobbyist perspective. But then you have all of those annoying cut points and smooth points, and then you have things like those mold lines that were all over the Fell Riders, and it becomes this set of sprues that's actually more effort to deal with than it strictly should be. Especially when you consider that they're not particularly complicated or difficult models to look at. They're not highly complex individuals with, you know, like twirling tentacles and all this kind of thing. They're pretty bog standard chief tribal warriors with weapon and shield. They're fairly meat and potatoes. They're glorious looking meat and potatoes, like a Sunday roast, but yeah, I think from the technical aspect, the actual sprues themselves are amongst some of the worst we reviewed on the channel. And I come at this from the perspective of being somebody who doesn't particularly enjoy building, so the more easy clip points and the more easy places to smooth down models and their components, that's what I really look for. That's the bit that is important to me when it comes to building the kit, not necessarily how cool the pieces necessarily are or things like that, because I think from the perspective of that, a lot of these pieces are really, really very kind of swappable, if that makes sense. Like the shields, none of them are really embossed in such a way where you couldn't use them on something completely different or throw them onto different models, or if you wanted to align these guys slightly different, then you probably could if you had those. For example, like Kyric Acolyte shields, you could probably throw them on here, and that's a pretty cool thing to do. However, yeah, I think this has been one of the most frustrating sets of models to build. Not to paint. To paint, so far it's been glorious. And actually, they're not as complex as they initially look. They do look a lot more complicated, and of course they're former Marauder brothers, but they actually don't sit in too difficult a place to paint, which is, you know, fantastic. They're very open, like particularly the Marauders. They're not all kind of closed off like this type of thing, making it difficult to get into spaces. They are in action poses. They are kind of doing some stuff that you don't normally see from these types of things. So the final product is lovely, but getting there is quite difficult from a building perspective. So yeah. So then we come to the inclusion of the Battle Tome supplement, the cards, the tokens, and you know, all of that is the stuff you expect to see in an army set, but it's nearly May and we have a 4th edition on the way. And so I feel like this box maybe was due to come out quite a few months ago, maybe. It feels just a little late in the game. And whilst they're a nice added extra, they're actually just... You shouldn't buy this box for them, because they really don't have much sway over things going forward. That being said, if we see more and more previewed of AOS 4, then we might be able to glean some insight as to what's going to happen with the Darkoath. And ultimately, it's a nice little full stop on the end of AOS 3. And if you're going to continue to play Age of Sigmar 3rd edition games, then hey, they're pretty cool. They work quite nicely with the rest of the Slaves to Darkness, and they've got their own cool little tricks, which is nice. But ultimately, I think a lot of people look at these army sets as also a way to get the rules. And I don't think this one really lands that way. And it is a little bit of a mind shift that has to be kind of had on the part of the customer to say, I'm buying that one just for the models. There is no real benefit to having the rules. Not really. I mean, it's not. It depends if you even really care about such things. I personally don't think I do, and I've wanted to add mortals to the Slaves to Darkness range anyway, and so I'm really glad that they sent me this box, and I would probably buy this just so that I had even more models going forward. And you never know, these sets of models might actually be a spearhead going into AOS 4. So in that respect, it's more of a foundational box, but it sits in this weird zone where you can't really make any predictions for the future, and also its current usage is not much longer for this world. So I think if you bear all of that in mind, I unfortunately do have to give this box, on the Land Raider scale, a 5.5 out of 10. The 5.5 is very, very, very harsh, I think, but like I said, you can't fault the aesthetic. I think the models look incredible. Even things like Mr. Wilderfiend just here. He's beautiful. Beautiful model. But there's just a lot in here that's not necessary. Like I said, the journey for building them was rough. It was difficult. It was more complex than it needed to be, and the sprues aren't particularly well laid out, or indeed actually packed very well in the box. But I don't know. I don't have to justify it. 5.5 does feel right. Because I'm, as I say, equal parts excited and equal parts ambivalent. So if you're looking forward to adding some mortals to your Slaves to Darkness army, if you bought the Slaves to Darkness army set, I think you absolutely should buy this box. You should have enough practice now building slightly more complicated models to build. However, maybe give this one a miss if you're not really sure. I don't know. The choice is yours on the consumer, of course. You don't have to listen to me. Of course you don't. No one does. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this one. I will see you all very soon for another Sprue review. Yep, we've got lots of them coming. ones I don't even know about yet. And of course we'll be back with painting tutorials for the entirety of the Slaves to Darkness Darkoath Army set. I think I just stumbled over the word Darkoath, but it's been a really long day and I've still got a lot left to do. See you all very, very soon. Thanks for watching. Happy wargaming.
If you enjoyed this video, you love the channel and you'd like to support me further, you absolutely can do so by heading to patreon.com/Warhipster, just like all of these wonderful, amazing people have done. And alternatively, you could become a YouTube channel member by clicking on the join button below, exactly like these fabulous folks have done, scrolling up on the screen before you. There are so many of you out there that it really takes my breath away, and I cannot thank you enough for everything you do, as without you I wouldn't be able to keep making these Contrast Plus videos. And if you really like this video and you want to send me a little thanks, just click on the thanks button just below this video. Don't forget to share it, like it, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and to make sure you stay up to date, don't forget to click the bell icon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Happy wargaming.